I think that fiction actually has a little bit more power than a nonfiction book on a subject, because very few people realize that they need help in an area enough to go to Amazon or go to a bookstore and go to that section and go, self-help, I need work here. But a really good story can move people to think things and consider things and ask questions that kind of comes in the back door. So I really like that about fiction if it's coming from, obviously, a Christian worldview. So that's kind of how I approach it. Lord, what do you want to say through me?
Hello, and welcome back to the Be Unbound podcast. I'm your co-host, David Rethemeyer.
And I'm your co-host, Jonathan Brush.
And we are joined with yet another fantastic guest this time around, and we have been blessed to be joined by some phenomenally talented people over the last couple of weeks, and that streak continues this week. We are joined by Robin Miller, who is phenomenally talented writer and speaker and teacher and all sorts of things, and I think she gives us in this week's episode a really fascinating look into a lot of her experiences, and yeah, I think it's really cool to have her on the show.
I was honestly thinking that we missed an opportunity to, I feel like if we had talked about scuba diving, she would have been certified. If we had talked about flying, she would have been a pilot. If we had talked about, it's just, and that just sort of came up casually as you were talking about other things. I used to do this and I used to play this and I used to do these things. And I'm a musician. And so anyhow, it was fun to hear some of those things. We knew she was a good writer. We knew she was a good teacher, but we discovered some other things in the course of this conversation. Two things, if you are continuing on to listen to this. First of all, if you're interested in writing in any fashion, whether you like to read or whether you want to write, you aspire to write sometime, you obviously will find this particularly interesting. But secondly, if you're also interested in to take something you're passionate about and make it work, to persist and to learn new things and to also find maybe unusual markets where other people don't. One of the fascinating things we talk about here is the statistics of who are successful as writers. You probably won't be surprised to know that it's low, but then what you can do to change those statistics overwhelmingly in your favor. And that would apply to writers, but would also apply to anything else that you want to do that maybe is a little harder than average, a little harder than normal, and yet you have a dream about it. So if those things pique your interest, this will be a podcast worth listening to, a conversation worth listening to, podcast too. Robin, welcome to the Be Unbound podcast. We're delighted to have you. We were joking around earlier, right off before we started recording, that we're all pretty busy in good ways. We're saying that as a blessing, not as a curse, not as a complaint. But there's, I think, Robin, you said it as almost kingdom expanding type work. And so we're doing that. And so that's super fun. However, it has wreaked merry havoc on our ability to schedule this. And so it's fun to finally have you here and present with us on this recording and a chance to do that. So as we get started here, we know you because you are the esteemed teacher of our writing track for the Ascend program. And so we know you from a writing standpoint and from an educational standpoint in terms of Ascend. But for those who don't know you, give us a little bit of background. Tell us who you are and how did you wind up on the Be Unbound podcast after weeks of scheduling effort on all of our parts?
Well, first, thank you for having me and having me and having me and actually now having me. Well, I am a writer and a teacher, and I do a lot of different writing things. And I didn't realize I was going to have a passion for teaching. My original goal with my life was I listened to my mother too much, and I did business first. And so I owned a bunch of businesses, and I stayed home with my kids and homeschooled and did all the things. And then I was pushing back my love of writing until I didn't have other responsibilities, and God kind of pulled that a little forward. And I think I just didn't I didn't believe in myself enough, actually. I wasn't raised in a Christian home, and I had to learn a lot of foundational things about who I am in Christ and what a gifting or a calling or a passion is. I always thought that was kind of a thing that we do on the side, but it can't possibly be God ordained or called or blessed because I enjoy it too much. And writing was one of those things for me. So I just sort of thought that was my indulgence that I could do on the side when I did the real business of living elsewhere. But as God would have it, he brought me into a calling as a writer, and I have now 10 books published and nine-book contract for 9 more over the next several years. And along the way, I became an editor. I became a teacher of writing. I got my MFA in writing, and now I'm a director of a writing conference. So it's kind of once I let myself lean into what God had put in me as a passion, gosh, exploded the boundaries, as we say. And I find teaching is actually equally as enjoyable and fulfilling and exciting as writing, which I wouldn't have never expected that. But that's what I do. And I live currently on the West Coast, but I'm moving to the East Coast in part to pursue some writing projects that will just be easier to do from that location. So we're just holding on. We're buckling up and waiting to see what the Lord is going to do. But right now I'm a writer teacher, and that's what I do.
And we'll see what's next. Yeah, we were discussing earlier that Robin's actually going to be moving about an hour, 2 hours below David and I. So welcome to Virginia and welcome to the
Thank
East
you.
Coast. So we're looking forward to that'll be fun to have you here. And so there's so much I'd like to unpack there, but let's go back a little bit because you said you had a passion for writing. Now, I just know by the experience of being around Unbound students that people listening to this podcast will have a higher percentage of normal than people who are passionate about writing. We just run into those folks all the time. And so, but there's, when people describe a passion for writing, that can express itself in lots of different ways and it can all be accurate. So because of that, I'm curious, when you say you had a passion for writing, what did that look like? Because you said you had it earlier, and we'll talk in a minute about how you actually got to the point where you started being able to put that into practice. But tell me what, for you, how was that defined in terms of a passion for writing?
I think it actually came out of a really kind of a sad situation. I did not have a great childhood. And so I read a lot. And that was when after reading being, for me, where I got a lot of my parenting from was actually through books. And there's a certain amount of escapism and all of those things that come with reading. But I think really, really early on, I found myself writing in journals and writing prose, and I would write letters to people more than other people my age. Like 9-year-olds are not known for writing longhand letters, but I loved doing that. I loved recording my days. But when I realized how kind of transformational writers were in my life in helping me to navigate, how God used actually writers to navigate a really challenging childhood, it clicked for me that my love for words, both reading and writing, could possibly be that for somebody else. And so that it's always been a part of who I am to read and to write in some form. So it manifested itself. I've written, because I've also been, my husband and I are both musicians too. And so I've been the director of worship at multiple churches. I've lived in England and in America. And so I write songs. I've written just about every form, even in the corporate world. I was the one writing the newsletters and the corporate collateral and all that sort of stuff. So it's come out, it's oozed out even when I didn't let it kind of formally come out. Writing was always a part of me. But I also realized it was a passion because it filled me. And I think that's the key to something that I believe is a God-given love of something. So you hear people saying, I just spent all my childhood under the hood of a car because I just loved the mechanics of it and I loved or sports or whatever it is that they were. And for me, I was also a soccer player, but I just absolutely was filled when I wrote. It helped me to process emotions. It helped me to record joy. It helped me to ask questions. It helped me to connect with people. So for me, writing was the thing that filled me up. So that's how I knew it was more than just a passing phase.
Yeah, David, I'm getting the impression it would have been easier if we'd asked Robin what she hadn't done and have that list.
Seriously.
Of things that she has done. As we're just sort of casually asking questions, she keeps throwing some more things on here. We're going to be on a 6-hour podcast series here. So first of all, I think you said you have 10 books published, something like that, 9 contracted. That is not an insignificant amount by any stretch, no matter how you look at it from writing. Mm-hmm. So before we get into that and to get some more detail, just very quickly, are those fiction, nonfiction, both?
So far, it's all been nonfiction. Okay. And the 9-book contract is also nonfiction. I kind of, again, God led me in, took two things of interest in my life, put them together, and has made a career out of something that I wasn't anticipating. But I also do have a novel that is going to be pitched here in the next little bit. So I'm one of those people that agents and publishers don't tend to like initially, where they want you to really focus on something, be a specialist in some area. But my literary agent happens to do exactly what I do. She writes everything, so she can't complain to me. So I picked the right agent. So.
That's great. I honestly, Robin, I would not have believed you if you had said you're writing just one after that, just our very brief conversation already. I already kind of anticipated it was to be both. So obviously the nonfiction is what you've got published and what you're working on now. I want to come back to that in a second. But for the fiction book, this is a curiosity for me. So I'm also an avid reader, and I also can relate. I had a job one time working away from home that involved a lot of travel, and I was desperately homesick. I really didn't like what I was doing, and I was kind of in this place where I didn't really agree with a lot of the people that I was living in very close proximity to, and a bunch of different things. And my escape was that I could get a library card when I had a piece of mail from, at the time, from the address I was staying at, so a local library card. So I remember using a phone card to call my parents and say, can you mail as fast as you can? I don't care, like you mail a blank piece of paper, just mail me something as fast as possible. And then like being miserable, getting that thing, running down the library, getting a library card. And then that was my escape, right? It was like I had to do the work. And then at some point I knew I could just sort of disappear into a different place and get a little bit of relief from the situation I was in. So I definitely relate to that. But what I'm curious about with the fiction part is that as somebody who's read a lot, both nonfiction and fiction, I'm always curious how you cross the line. And what I mean by cross the line is that, because you said you get a lot of satisfaction out of writing, but you also got a lot of satisfaction out of reading. Tell me a little bit about what it's like, because it's different being the movie director than watching the movie. It's different being the author than reading the book, right? I mean, like in some ways, when you read the book, everything's new and a surprise. And of course, when you write it, you're kind of creating it. Now, I've had some authors tell me, well, it was all a surprise to me too. I think Rex Stout was a mystery writer, and his favorite detective was Nero Wolfe. And he has this famous passage where he says, he writes that Nero Wolfe's brother walked in, or brother or daughter, I can't remember which it was. And Rex Stout says, I was dumbfounded. I had no idea Nero Wolfe had a brother. I mean, he's writing the book, and I always thought that was a fascinating statement. And so tell me a little bit about that from your experience in writing the novel, and then we'll come back to the nonfiction stuff.
It is a really, everybody writes in a different way, and everybody writes for a different reason. But if you've ever heard of the term, probably not. If you're not in the writing world, this is kind of a weird set of terms, but there's a term plotter and pantser. And those are the two kinds of fiction writers usually. And a plotter is the one who will write out every scene, every chapter. They know exactly what's going on. They've got a picture that they pulled off the internet of their main characters. They're looking in their eyes and they put all their backstory into it. And so it takes them a long time to do all that, to world build and whatever else. And then they write their story. A pantser sits down and says, I wonder what's going to happen today. I wonder what door's going to open and somebody's going to walk in. When I was doing my MFA, which is in creative nonfiction and fiction, was actually what my degree is in, they wanted us to kind of identify as one of the two. And I literally couldn't do that. I call myself a plantser because I have a strong idea of what I want to accomplish. I have a strong idea of my characters. And there's two things in every fiction story. One is a plot, and that's just what happens. The story is the emotional journey. So that's the thing you want somebody to learn or to grow through or whatever. I always know the story that I want to tell. Don't always know the plot I want to tell. But I am very happy for a door to open and to have a sister that I didn't know walk in. I think that that's part of the exciting thing about writing, because if they come through that door, I know there's a reason that they are there. So the kind of analytical and, just the person who just loves to read wants to know why they're there, what purpose they would be serving in the story. And that can change things that I didn't even know were there. So for me, this sounds very name droppy, but one of my friends is Francine Rivers. And I've also been the president of writing organizations, and she's done workshops and things for us too. So we've had a lot of time to talk, both personally and kind of professionally. And how she writes every one of her books is God gives her something that she's working through in her own life. And she writes the book to work through that issue. So her first book, based on Hosea, after she became a Christian, Redeeming Love, was really her working through her past versus her new salvation and working through what that looked like. And her characters are all the voices in her head. So the ones who are basically arguing with her and saying you should not be, redeemed by grace and all the things, and the scriptures coming out of somebody's mouth. And I've thought about that as I've started writing more and more fiction. I mean, I had to write fiction for my MFA, but as I'm writing it now more commercially, how I want to approach it is kind of a little bit like that. I want to think about what I want to say, and then or what God's doing in my life or what I want to put out into the world. Because I think that fiction actually has a little bit more power than a nonfiction book on a subject. because very few people realize that they need help in an area enough to go to Amazon or go to a bookstore and go to that section and go, self-help, I need work here. But a really good story can move people to think things and consider things and ask questions that kind of comes in the back door. So I really like that about fiction if it's coming from obviously a Christian worldview. So that's kind of how I approach it. Lord, what do you want to say through me? What do I feel passionate about? One of the things that I'm excited about doing at the event in January is I get to do my favorite thing to teach of all the things in writing to teach is something called What Are You Really Writing About? And it's a series of exercises that reveals very obviously where you're at right now, what God is doing in your life, and what he wants you to bring to the world. And that's how I approach it with writing. Yes, I love fun stories. Yes, I think that there's all sorts of value in just being entertained, but I also think you can slip in a little, like some vegetables in the macaroni and cheese kind of thing. I think you can get a lot of meat in a very entertaining form. So that's one of the reasons I love approaching fiction with that idea. I want it to be entertaining, obviously, but I also feel like there's something to be said too. So
I was listening to an article today. I think, like right around now, is it the 75th anniversary of Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe? It's a significant anniversary. I think it's 75. It sounds about right. And I was listening to a podcast this morning that was talking about it, and they said that the first opening line of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was actually one of the more boring lines in literature. But the dedication is to a little girl named Lucy. And if you read the dedication, it's almost the most Narnian thing of all. I think Joe Rigney has commented a lot on Narnia, mentioned that. But they went on to say that Lewis, when he was 11 years old or something fairly young, had a vision of a fawn walking through the woods carrying packages with an umbrella. And when he became 40, he decided that he was going to put a story around that. And I thought that was really interesting in terms of that one little thing. I'm not a writer, but I had a strange occurrence happen to me one time that turned out to be completely mundane. It just started to look a little freaky at first. And I've always had that stuck in my head as like, what would have happened if it has been as freaky as I thought it was? We were driving back actually from Lynchburg, and we took a turn, and the GPS routed us a different way, and we didn't have to be anywhere. So we knew it wasn't the most direct route. We took it anyhow. Well, it was very, very rainy and foggy and misty. And so we're driving through, and the fog has really crept down, and it got dark. And so it was dark and foggy, and you couldn't see very far ahead of us. And as we came around the corner of the bend, in front of us was a van, the exact same color and model as the one we were driving. But it got worse. It had the same license plate style that we had, and it had the first letter of our license plate. And we kind of came around the corner, and there was this eerie, like, just hair standing on the back of your neck, because my wife and I were looking at it. And then, the van pulled away. It was a different license plate. And then as you got closer, you could see some of the differences and stuff like that. And then it turned a little bit farther there. But I remember thinking, what would the story be if the back window was fogged up, if a little hand had come back and scraped out the window, and I was looking at one of my children? You know what I mean? Like they're just like the weird kind of like time travel type stuff. And so when I heard that this morning, I was just thinking, I don't know that I'll be a writer, but if I did, I'd want to explore that scene. It was such a weird, spine-tingling thing that happened. And to be clear, it was super mundane. The van was clearly not our van. It turned off. I mean, there was all kinds of days, so let's get close. But that first coming out of the mist was just this kind of a arresting moment of like, what just happened here? So, well, let's go from science fiction and Jonathan's weird psychological problems and on to some other things. Tell us about your nonfiction books, because obviously you've got great success there with 10 out and 9 coming. So tell us about that.
Well, I kind of fell into that. Originally, I thought I was only going to be writing fiction ever, and that was what I wanted to write. So it is kind of funny that I have 10 nonfiction books and 9 contracted. That's God. What I did is the first time I went to a writer's conference, because marketing and business was my first career. That's what I did. I have a marketing degree and a business degree and an English degree and a voice degree. And then I got into the MFA. So I like school. I like learning. I don't like school. I like learning. And I went with this idea, and I had done all the marketing and the business stuff. I had charts. I had I had the whole thing. I had done a feasibility study on this audience. And I was shut down without people looking at the actual data. They just said, oh, that was 1970s. That's not now. And I kept saying, actually, it's a sustainable, growing market worldwide. It actually is. And they kept telling me, nuh-uh. And it was so frustrating to me because I had data. I had so much data, and nobody would even look at it. So I went home from that conference and I said, I need proof that a book that addresses or that would be sold into this audience would sell. So I went home and in 2 weeks I wrote a book, and because fiction was not, I couldn't write fiction in that, a novel that I was happy with putting into the world, that is. So I wrote a nonfiction book that would be to the same audience, and it sold very well. I self-published it, and it's ridiculous. Now I look at it and I have to remind myself it's early work. It's early work because it was not the best thing that has ever come out of my computer. But what happened was that year on Amazon and the New York Times bestselling list and the USA bestselling list and all of that, there was a book to the same audience that was the bestseller. And so my book kind of got hooked with, if you buy this kind of a situation. And it sold brilliantly well. And then that audience wanted more. And so I thought, well, actually, I've always had some questions about this audience. And I'm trying to say it because there's two guys here. But I'm going to try this in as guile way as possible. It has to do with Little House on the Prairie. And they were pivotal. As a child, they parented me. I was one of the Ingalls in the corner. I was helping with.
My mom read Little House on the Prairie aloud to us, all the books I was growing up. So, David, I'm guessing that we actually have probably some pretty good Little House background.
My son, who just is now in Liberty, my youngest son, we were on our way to where Farmer Boy in New York. Yeah. The house is still there, Almanzo Wilder's house, and it is Almanzo, not Almanzo. Wilder's house is there, and on the way there, I had him read the book so that he would have a little history connection with it. And he snapped the book shut in the back of the car, and he said, "Well, Mama, you've used Farmer Boy as a gateway drug. Now I want to read all the books."
Yeah. No, I
didn't mean to do that, son, but okay.
Guy or girl, they should definitely read those books. So, and just as a total aside, and probably a whole separate podcast, the Farmer Boy scene that I never failed to be just like raises my eyebrows right up to my hairline, which is farther and farther away every year, is the whole school scene, right? If you want to talk about school violence and just the kind of different perspectives, like when I heard as a kid, it was interesting. And every couple years have gone by when I read that scene again, I'm like, what is happening here? So anyhow, just if you haven't read Farmer Boy.
And the scary thing is that wasn't in the Wild West. That was in a fairly settled East.
No, it was the part that is scary about it was how it was fairly unremarkable, right? His father just took it in stride. And so anyhow, if you've not read Farmer Boy, audience, you should read that. Yeah. And when you get to the scene, you'll know exactly what we're talking about.
Exactly. So, yeah. I'm with you. That still troubles me. So anyway, so I thought, well, they wanted this audience wanted more Little House content. And I thought, well, what would I want to know? And that's one of the things a lot of nonfiction writers write the book that they wish was out there.
Right.
And that's a great way to go about it because any book takes a long time to write. It can be a very laborious thing. At some points you get tired, you want to go into another project. So I always thought I actually wanted to know if the mean girl, Nellie Oleson, I wanted her to grow up, adopt puppies, dig wells in Africa. I wanted her to run the soup kitchen in her town. I wanted a redemption story. And I felt like everybody focuses on how mean she was, but I thought, what if I brought to the world that she came to Jesus and she, changed? I wrote a book called The Three Faces of Nellie because she's a composite character of three girls that were in Laura Ingalls Wilder's life. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, didn't get to write my redemption story. It's a mini biography of those three women. And one of them really wasn't a Nellie at all. She was just a love rival with Almanzo. But two, very, very challenging human beings. To write it factually and not have it look like still the National Enquirer wrote a book about them, it's hard because they had kind of questionable lives. But when that happened, that book then solidified me as kind of a rock star in the Little House world, because I am the world expert on Nellie Oleson now. And so we've written other things in that genre because I know that audience. I love that audience. I'm not the kind of person who, I don't want to write fan fiction about that. I don't want to write a novel that I'm pretending to be any one of those characters. But there are questions that I had, and I thought it's an interesting topic for me. I love the period in history. I love doing research. My husband and also my writing research partner, we just love that period to do research in. So we are very, very happy to continue to put out Little House content if we need to, because it's a subject we're interested in. But I'm definitely on the side of I want the information. I want the real information. So I'm more on the biography, or my last book was called Tennessee Wildcat. Mr. Edwards, the character of Mr. Edwards, is the only one in all of her books, all of Laura Ingalls Wilder books, that we're not quite sure exactly who he was. So I wrote a book trying to figure it out. And that was interesting to me because it was a puzzle and it was a mystery. And we just looked at a bunch of data and then drew the best conclusion we could. That's the kind of thing I would write. But I'm not going to be writing a book that is fiction-ish, but based on that. And that's not kind of what I feel drawn to. So I'll stay nonfiction. And I've also helped write a memoir for somebody else and a bunch of other things. But that will be the area I stay there. And then fiction will be a completely different animal. Probably not in the Little House Times, but who knows?
So I think when you say fiction, like there are some authors who write fiction that is all about real events. So it's historical fiction. Jeff Shara is the one that comes to mind. I don't know if you've ever read anything. He has a whole series almost about along every American war. Yep. And so there's a 2 or 3 book series of the American Revolution. There's the Mexican War, War of 1812, Mexican War. It goes on through. And then there's quite an extensive World War II series. And they're fascinating to me to read because they read like a novel. But every single person, without exception, every single person was a historical figure. Every event is a historical event. And then there's extensive notes in the back. And the last novel he had of the War in the Pacific, the person in the back actually lived within 11 miles of where I am now. And in fact, when they described the house, I knew exactly which house it was. Wow. So I immediately looked it up, and he had passed away mere weeks before I finished the book. Like it was really, really close. But it was really fascinating, and that kind of writing has always been intriguing to me. It seems to me it has the challenges of both, and I was curious to me, Rob, because since you apparently do both of everything, I was getting ready for you to say that you're going to write that novelization just because but because of the accuracy and the research necessary for the historical stuff.
I could do it.
Yeah. But
I could do it, but let me tell you why, and I will tell you. No, I will tell you exactly why I will not step into that pond. What you're talking about, I love. I love things that are based on real events, real people. And I'm one of the people that can appreciate that it's always going to be interpretation. We obviously, in a novelized version of some event, we're not going to know what everybody said or what everybody wore. And I'm fine with that. Because I love history, I absolutely love that. And my favorite literature to read is historical stuff. And it doesn't even matter what period. I'm not just partial to any one. I just love anything that puts me in a time or place with real people. I love it. Why I won't do it comes from the first speaking engagement I had to a Little House audience was at an annual, and it's actually an academic conference. So I'm going to tell you the name, and you're going to laugh at it because it sounds kind of goofy, but it actually is a completely academic conference, and it's called Laurapalooza. And it is held every couple of years, and it moves around the country, usually, well, not usually, it's always near a Little House site of some kind. And they have physicists coming in and telling the nature of tornadoes and how to create them. They have weather people coming in. They have construction people talking about how Saudis are built and just a bunch of other things. This was after The Three Faces of Nellie was published, so I was going to be talking about doing a presentation on Nellie. They put me between on what they call the Hard Hitters Day. So the big names of Bill Anderson, who is the godfather of all Little House biographies, especially about Laura Ingalls Wilder herself. He knows everything. He is the original writer of all things that were nonfiction. And he's just an awesome person. He's also now a friend of mine, but he's an awesome person. Didn't know him then. And then that book that I told you about that sold was the top of everything Amazon, New York Times bestseller list. Pamela Smith-Field was the editor of the Pioneer Girl annotated autobiography. It was Bill, me, then Pam. So they put, what I was considering is they put a slice of Spam between 2 brioche buns or something. And I was very, very nervous. Very, very nervous already. I wanted to be with the unwashed masses on one of the other days and just slip in there, do my piece, and step out. But by that time, it was deep in the conference, and I realized that you had to be on your game. So Bill Anderson, who again is an absolute legend in this field and in this community, he actually mispronounced Almanzo's name. One time, almost always he said Almanzo, but one time he said Almanzo. And the crowd went just like they were horrified. They were horrified at one tiny error. And I was looking at the whole audience thinking, what if I make a mistake? It's like, they're like piranhas. They know everything. This is an audience that knows everything about everything. And you do not make any mistakes, and you don't mispronounce, and you don't have a wrong date. And so I'm not afraid of public speaking. It's what I do. I teach and I speak. So, but I walked up there and I was shaking so badly that I was like, they're going to eat me alive, because I'm nobody compared to the two people on either side of me. I was rather new in the industry at this time. And I went up there, I did it, no mistakes, there was no tomatoes, rotten eggs, or anything. But I thought, I am never going to put myself into a place where my interpretation of Ma's personality, or what Nellie might have said to her brother, or something where you have to kind of use a little bit of creative license, people will hunt me down and hurt me. And so I thought, you guys, you do you. I'm going to step on this side of the fence, and I might write fiction that is based in history, but it won't be about the Ingalls. I'm brave. I'm a brave woman, but not that brave.
Yeah, it's so fascinating that you've just made it's like such a name for yourself, and like solidified yourself in like such a niche that has people who are so very passionate about this world and these characters and things like that. And it's a double-edged sword, because I mean, you have a background in business where like if you find a niche that you can really establish yourself in, that's one of the best things that you can do. But there's also the double-edged sword of if you end up doing something that makes that particular niche mad, then you're potentially up a creek. So it's really interesting to hear you kind of tell that from a writing perspective with a specific interest group. I had never really thought about that before.
And if you think about it, if you read something about the Mexican-American War, for example, there will be a historian who'll write and say, you know what, that happened on a Tuesday, you put it on a Wednesday. Somebody will be there, but they will not come to you and hurt you. No, I'm thinking these people are not. They're not going to hurt you. But they're rabid. They are very passionate about it. It is a very weird, and of course, with a marketing business background, I studied niche markets, and this is a very unique one in that people are emotionally vested. So there are people who do not want to hear that Ma had a flaw, or that Laura Ingalls Wilder had a flaw. And I'm of the persuasion that we're humans, so we all have flaws.
Wasn't there a pretty big scandal in that whole world not too long ago, or maybe it's an ongoing scandal about whether Rose wrote the books and things like that?
Yes, and that's been completely proven. When all that kind of came about, that was when we had the actual manuscripts, and Rose had absolute impact on a lot of things, but we have the original manuscripts that Laura wrote, and the voice is completely different, and we have the letters back and forth where Rose would say, you need to do this. And Laura would write back, nuh-uh, not gonna. So we see that she did not write them at all. She did have a lot of impact on editing them and helping her mom to understand narrative arc and all those things. And that's one of the reasons that Nellie ended up being a composite character, to keep the number of characters in the stories just minimal, and we could focus on them. So she had impact, absolutely. But she did not write them. And Rose was a very different kind of person to her mom, and she actually stole Laura's actual whole childhood storyline and wrote it as Let the Hurricane Roar, and you even used her grandparents' names, and she tried to say it wasn't their story, but it's exactly the story that Laura then wrote about later. And you can see in her rendering of that story, completely different voice, completely different viewpoint and perspective. Laura was a Christian woman, Rose was not. And so you can just see what elements you bring out in a story by what details you tell. So thankfully we have the original stuff to put that to rest. And there are people, again, who love Rose and think she was great, and then there are other people that think she was awful and horrible, and I just stay out of that fray. I just stay right in my little corner.
I think that was my introduction to the fact that there was, more layers there when I first heard about that. So, well, I would just say that thank goodness it's about something real. I watched a Star Wars fan film on YouTube one time, and and just out of curiosity, I'm scrolling through the comments, and there are people having just vicious arguments about, little units inside of certain imperial, and you're like 15 or 20 layers deep in the comments, and I'm like, y'all realize this is not real. Yeah. You know, like it's reading like they're citing historical documents and all this kind of stuff, and I'm thinking, this is all kind of imaginary here. So at least you're arguing about something worthwhile. So, well, Robin, as we finish up here, you are certainly a niche market in this particular area, which is really cool and fascinating. But you operate outside that market in so many other ways. And so, just real quick before we finish up here, tell us a little bit about the Writers Conference you do, because that's a conference that I think one of the things that makes you really interesting to us at Unbound is that, yes, you're a very successful writer and across multiple genres and doing things, in one niche but in others. But I think one of the things that we've been fascinated with in terms of the way the writing track has gone and what you've set up there is that you very much teach our students to be better writers, sure, but more importantly, be successful writers, meaning writers that get published. And there is this aspect, and we find this with our art track as well, that we want you to be excellent at your craft. We want you to be able to write your heart's desire and all those kinds of things. But we also have to realize that unless you're independently funded, you have to write in such a way that you make money. And I think that you've had quite an expertise here, both inside the track that you do with Unbound, but maybe in a more broad sense with your writing conference, and helping writers to get published. So tell us just a little bit about that as we finish up.
And I think that's critical. I mean, we all fantasize about what would we want to do, but no matter whatever you want to do, start a restaurant, if you like to cook, there's still ordering and staff management and cleaning. There's every single thing that you do. There's going to be elements that you need to think about. And so I try to be very realistic. The one thing that I have them do really early on in my course is there's a video from a very successful award-winning author, James L. Rubart. But he says that in this video, only about 2% of authors make a living at it. And the first class after that, all the faces are a different face than the first shiny, bright, can't wait to do it. And I say, but now let me bring in my marketing. That's a skewed sample because not all authors are trying to be a full-time author. So of the people who are trying to do it, that actual number is about 5%. So 2% being successful is actually 40+% of people who are trying to make it their actual job are successful. Now, that's still not great, but it's not 2% either. So I give them the tools. I give them the language. And one of the things that I started as a writer in a writing group, and then I became president of that writing organization. And eventually, now I'm directing this conference because I believe 100% that knowledge is power, and we need to know what we need to know, and connections are everything in this industry. Well, there's a lot of people writing, and if you want to be successful and be published, getting to sit down and have somebody look into your eyes while you explain your project and the passion that you have for it and your investment in it will go a long way to putting your proposal or pitch for that project to the top of the pile, which is huge. So that's critical for me. Also, the communal aspect of it, critical. It's a solitary thing, writing. We all sit in wherever we sit with our laptops or our computers, or if we're still writing by hand, usually that's alone. So I think it's critical that people get where other people are there to pray for you and to encourage you and to equip you. And that's the whole remit of what Vision is. And my personal, when I put together a faculty, and I put together the highest faculty to attendee ratio very intentionally, and I break down every possible wall. I remember my first time going to a conference where I was scared to meet Christie Award-winning, authors and heads of different publishers and things, and I wanted to break down those walls because I've got a Team Jesus approach where the starting writer and the head of something needs to be able to communicate to do the business of Jesus. So we work very hard to have our particular conference be that place where people can form those relationships, can ask those questions, can pitch those projects with a loving, Jesus-focused group of faculty. And it's worked out brilliantly. The number of people that have been signed by agents and editors and publishers and that have gotten projects contracted and things has been great. But more than that, we're all there to center on what God is calling us to do and to be equipped and encouraged to go out to do that for the rest of the year. So critical to me to get writers together in a place that they can do that. And we're not the only option. There's brilliant options across the U.S., but we are one option. And we do have people come from all over the world, actually.
Well, you're the option we care about the most right now. So, with that in mind, tell us how we can find out more about you, your books that you're writing, and the Writers Workshop. Where are the places we should go to find those things?
For me, it's the robynmiller.com is my website, and Robin is spelled a funny way, Robynne. And for Vision, you can just do a Google search of Vision Christian Writers Conference, and we're usually the first person that comes up. It's in California at the Mount Hermon Christian Writers Conference Center. They used to do Mount Hermon Christian Writers did a 50-year conference that ended in the pandemic when they had to shift their model because of the pandemic. But we're there, and we're doing the same thing with a lot of the faculty they used to have. So it's like a hybrid of the historic and something new. And Vision is now we're formally forming as a nonprofit actually this month, and we're doing other events. We're doing workshops and intensives and things in other parts of the country, and we're also going into other countries, Brazil and New Zealand. We're hoping to do something there. So it's Vision Christian Writers. If you just do a Google search on that, will come up. And I in my class, I offered my students it is expensive. It's a 4-day all-inclusive. It's lodging, it's all the teaching, it's 12 meals, all the things. And I offered free to my students. And we have at least one that is coming, which is really cool. And I have 5 more spots that would be available. So any other Unbound student that wants to come, if they want to come, I have those set aside. That's part of our ministry to equip. I say younger writers, but I don't mean that in age. I mean newer writers. So there could be an 80-year-old new writer that would qualify for this. So because we want to do the business of God. It's run as a nonprofit. Nobody earns any money or even salaries. So it's super, super, super good value for zero. So if you're interested, just give me through the Vision Christian Writers. The website has a contact me, and I'll get you sorted because good things happen in the Redwoods.
We'll put those things in the show notes for sure. And we can also endorse the Writers Conference. We have our own Victoria Schurter, who has been there and was a good writer before she went and then came back. And, I think we'll eventually see Victoria on some New York Times bestselling lists. But at the moment, I can tell you there's thousands of pages of class content that Victoria has written that you can experience if you're in our programs. And the output and the quality of that are sort of mind-boggling, and some of that was learned at the Writers' Conference and some of the mentorship and learning there. So, well, Robin, thank you so much. This has been a fascinating, fun conversation. If we don't see you in Virginia, which might be really cool and possible here soon, I will definitely see you in Florida for the event and look forward to it.
Could you not do the snow this year? That would be great.
Yes, we would love to go to Florida. I'm kind of... Every time I've attempted to take Unbound to the South because, it's cold the rest of the country, the South has completely rebelled against us. So I'm wondering about reverse psychology. Maybe we should go to Maine in January and we'll get sunburned.
Yes.
I don't know. So, yeah.
Go to Minnesota and you'll bring all the warmth to them. Come on.
Yeah. Last year, 4 inches of snow on the beach in Panama City Beach, Florida was not anything that we anticipated. But, life is an adventure and is a story even we didn't know we were going to write. But we did get some fun stories out of it. So.
It was fun. It was a great event.
It was something else. So, well, thanks, Robin. I appreciate you being here, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, as we talked about there at the end and touched on a little bit, and Robin's story was actually so fascinating that was much more fun to have as a conversation. But from a practical standpoint, as we come out of this, it's just worth noting that Robin's focus on teaching the track at Unbound in our Ascend program and her focus in the conference, Vision Conference that she talks about, is a very intensely practical focus. And we'll just, kind of get back up on her soapbox that we've been on a lot here before. And so this is not a surprise to our long-term audience, but I've often wondered if the most important role for Unbound to play in long-term kingdom building would be as a place where young people would come and get introduced to storytelling arts and find ways to express that. Now, that's not the only thing we do. It's not even the majority thing that we do. There's probably way more people that come interested in more so-called practical things like business and stuff like that. But we do have this large group of folks who have interest and talent in these areas. And like everybody else that has interest and talent there, everybody around them kind of says, yeah, that's nice, but you should get a real job. And one of the things that Robin does and that Jared does, as we talked about with an earlier episode with our writing track, is that they really talk about how do you practically do this And the practical part includes a financial piece. And so how is it that you are able to leverage these skills that God may have given you to be able to make money as an artist, as a storyteller, as a writer? And I think that's fascinating because I think we're in a situation where we're in desperate need of good storytellers. And whether you're telling that story as a fictional story, or if you're telling that story through nonfiction where you're still telling a story, right? There is a need for those kinds of skills in today's world. And I think Christians have a unique perspective on that in terms of how to tell good stories, since we're people that follow a story. And I think Robin's really interesting in that she's not only good at that, but she's good at teaching people how to do it. So there's a practical aspect to this.
Yeah, and I think something that she said towards the very end there that really stuck out to me that I think is a really important piece of that is I think we socially have this image of artists and writers that are just sort of these lone wolf creatives that lock themselves up in their rooms and their studios and are just out of society for such a long time and then just come out with these brilliant pieces of art. But really the reality, especially if you want to make a sustainable career out of something like that, is that you have to be in community with other people who are able to encourage you and challenge you and give you new perspective on things. And so I think I would venture to guess that a lot of the reason that Unbound students end up becoming so passionate about creating worthwhile and meaningful, significant art when they get to be a part of the programs that we offer is the fact that they're suddenly around others who also recognize the need for good art by those from a Christian perspective and are also just willing to be excited about that and to challenge and push each other in those areas. And they have some of that community already, even as they're just getting started. So I think that's something that we really should not underestimate is the power of community in creating art.
Well, absolutely. Yes to all of that. And just one last thing for listeners, just maybe a quick recap of what Robin did here. She has a passion for writing. She wants to do that. She puts the work in to find the audience, but then not only that, she puts the work in to broaden her skills, to build the context, to build the skills. She used her marketing skills that she developed personally to be able to figure out this niche market. And then she was able to prove it by putting a book together and marketing all those kinds of things. There's a really interesting piece there. You know, she mentioned in the conversation that only 2% or 5% of writers are successful. But then if you take the ones who are trying, then it becomes 40%. You might say that there's another statistic there. If you take the ones who are trying and who are willing to put the work in to figure out the skills that they need and do the preparation and get the community, to David's point, they need, I suspect now we're looking at a success rate that's much, much different again. And so in the same fashion, we might challenge you to say, we know Robin because she teaches the writing track for Ascend. You can think of a track as a major and certificates as degrees in kind of our Ascend program. And remember, that writing track is in the Ascend program that comes with a full job guarantee. Now, we don't guarantee that you get a writing job, but we get a guarantee that you have a job that ultimately could support being able to be a full-time writer in the future, if not being able to go into that immediately. And so there's an interesting example here. In some ways, we're a niche, and in some ways, we're a specific educational thing. But if you're looking to not just be a writer, but you're looking to be that 4%, that 5%, people that are equipped differently than everybody else, people that are able to see and understand the world better than everybody else, people that are able to make an impact in the world bigger than everybody else. And we're not talking about an impact like fame, fortune, power. We're talking about an impact of being able to do just your normal everyday life in a way that is meaningful and impactful on a whole new level that nobody else can do. Well, that's what Unbound does. And we do that through our programs for both high school students, high school seniors, as well as post-high school, our flagship Ascend program. And, we work with people like Robin who have that high level of technical skill, that personal resume of personal success with their technical skill, and then that special ability to teach those things. That's what Ascend is full of. That's what Unbound is full of. That's what our high school programs are full of. Those kinds of people, that kind of content, and with that kind of focus, with helping you be able to get to where you want to go, even if it's something as niche as a 4 or 5% success rate type of opportunity, and we say, no, we can bend those odds and make that much better. So if you're interested in those things, please go to beunbound.us. You can learn more about them there. Until we talk to you again, be unbound.